You are listening to Mind Shock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Quick mic check. Does this sound better? Or does this sound better? Is this better? Test 1, test 2. Test 1, test 2. Which do the listeners prefer? Saddlebum says 2. Okay. So if this is better, let me adjust the settings here. Okay, 2 is better. Alrighty then. Welcome to another thrilling edition of the Mind Shock podcast. Today we are logically examining what is the greatest modern decade, as in the greatest decade out of the last, I don't know, what are we going to say, 8 or so? Anything further back's kind of difficult to verify. The 80s usually get heralded as the greatest decade in modern history. The 90s are often called the last great decade. But it's kind of hard to nail down which is the better decade, particularly when examining the early 80s versus late 80s and early 90s versus late 90s. Late 90s were a little bit more iffy, but I would argue early to mid 90s were up there. We're up there. Same thing with 80, 81, 82. I mean, the technology wasn't quite there. Some people preferred that. But mid to late 80s might have been peak civilization. It might have been peak human civilization, or at least in our modern cycle. As always, if you want to help support the Mind Shock podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it's quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. If you're still not getting them, just like and comment and share more videos. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section unless you are here with us live. Then you can participate in the live chat. It usually gets pretty interesting here. We examine any and all aspects of any and all topics. Okay, so in a second we'll do a poll of the current people in chat who believe whether it was 80s or 90s or another decade. Then I'm going to go over the discussion we had in the community tab on YouTube here on MindShock. If you are not aware, we have many interesting discussions in the community tab on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/MindShock. You can check it out. Go to the community tab, lots of polls and discussion. It's kind of like Twitter, but with a lot less riffraff and random goofs. There's still some of them. You know, you still got goofs like Tsutsaka. our resident Dunning-Kruger goof, who surprised he's not here right now, actually. So, when examining which decade was greater, we're talking all aspects here. We're talking economy, mental states like index of happiness. We're talking entertainment of all kinds, music, movies, etc. We're talking what people did in their free time and how they did it. Human interaction, technology, the pros, the cons, the general health of populations, mental and physical. Everything is going to be kept in mind here when trying to determine what the better decade was. Alright, so poll is launching now. Now, YouTube does have this set up where it has to be a yes or no. So, no means 9. So, yes is 80s. No means 90. 90s. So the question is, was the 80s the best decade? If you put no, that means 90s. If you put other, that means not 80s or 90s. And then, of course, too triggered to answer is always a possibility here in MindShock polls. So let's see what's going on here. So far, oh, it was even, but now the 80s is in the lead with a tie between 90s, other decade, and too triggered to answer. All right, so yeah, we have 80s has the most votes so far, 50%. 90s 17%, other decade 17%, to trigger to answer 17%. Okay, and we will do another poll at the end to see if our discussion has changed any minds. All right, so let's have it. Everyone in the chat, actually, I'll go through the community, what we went over in the community tab first, then we'll dissect that, and then everybody can chime in. So there were some interesting thoughts here. Some of them I had not I hadn't seen arguments quite like this made before regarding the decades. A little bit of lag in the stream, just trying to keep it as snappy as possible. Which YouTube makes very, very difficult. But we do the best we can here. Oh, wow. Okay, so... Man. This lag is tough. Should I not have done that NASA Occult Patches podcast? Okay. Yeah, I mean this is quite difficult just to get hmm. So it won't let me put it on the screen, but I'll just read through it. Okay. Let's see what we can do here. So in the original poll I had in the YouTube community tab, it was pretty close. 43%. So there was 450 votes. 43% voted 80s, 40% voted 90s. So it's really neck and neck. 12% other decade. Allison said, for me personally, the best decade was the 80s. Great music, etc. My band turned up in 85. They are called Aha, and they come from Norway. They had the groundbreaking video for the first single, Take On Me, and I have been a fan of theirs for the past 40 years. They are a great band. Jenna said, I was stuck in the 80s up until about 5 years ago. Now the 90s were pretty rad looking back. They're both the best to me, so I get it. Because my original post was that I go back and forth between which was the better decade. I don't think it's that easy to determine. I don't think it's that easy. Joyce in the chat here saying, that podcast was the beginning of YouTube putting you on their radar for sure. Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, there might have been like one glitch a year before that podcast. And then since, it's pretty much multiple glitches almost every day. every live. Yeah, it's crazy. Maybe it's coincidental though. I mean, maybe maybe it's all coincidental. I'm sure that Isaac Cappy stream didn't help. Okay, so yeah, let's continue going through this here. Sherryland said, I'm really enjoying this crap show the lizards have going. The reptilian interdimensional shapeshifters, is that who Cheryl's referring to? Again, if you haven't checked out the reptilian podcast here on MindShock, David Icke and all, check that out. The most comprehensive deep dive into the interdimensional reptilian shapeshifters running the Illuminati and the New World Order here on MindShock. Dylan says, the 90s, but being born in 92, I guess I'm biased. Wish I had been older to enjoy it more. Sam Smith said, 60s were definitely the best. I'd tell you about it, but it's true what they say, quote, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. You know, it's funny. I actually had a conversation. I had a conversation with an older gentleman. And I don't know if we were specifically talking decades, but I think we were. This was quite a few years ago, maybe around 2010. And like I said, he's a bit older, so he lived through the 60s. I don't know if maybe he was a teenager in the 60s, maybe late teens, early 20s, somewhere around there in the 60s. And he said basically he can't remember a lot of it, but what younger people think of as the 80s and 90s as free compared to now, the 60s and the 60s were what the late 70s and early 80s people referred to as free. Now, if you think about it, and you think about population density, it kind of makes sense, because in the 60s, when there wasn't this over-commercialization that technically started in the 70s. I mean, maybe late 60s, but probably mid to late 70s. So in the 60s, I mean, you could literally go drag race cars and the cops, I mean, there wasn't even enough cops to bother you in most places. I mean, you could find, even next to major cities, if you go a little bit outside of the city in the 60s, you could find like long stretches of roads, like kids could drag race. I mean, kids could do fight clubs. There's so many things that kids could, not that they don't do that now, but it was so much easier. Like just the level of freedom. And that was kind of interesting that he said that. And not just drug use, because there weren't all these anti-drug police squads and all this. Not that I endorse or promote drug use of any kind, alcohol or otherwise. But just in the in the matter of freedom and doing whatever you want, the 60s seem to be more free than the 80s or 90s. Now, obviously, freedom is not the only metric we're talking about here. Because obviously the 60s didn't quite have the technology. But on the other hand, do you really need that much tech to have fun? There was a meme. Oh, I wonder if I could find it now. It's so pertinent here. I don't save all good memes, but maybe I should. Yeah, I can't find it, but it was a meme of some kid really happy. I don't know if it was a kid in Africa or somewhere, really happy playing with like a rock in the dirt outdoors in rags, dressed in rags. And then there was a crying little girl in her like large pink bedroom with Barbie dream house or whatever, but she didn't get the latest Barbie toy or the latest Barbie car, and she's just crying and screaming about it, so upset. Interesting meme. Very interesting meme. Flatless in the house here, and the one and only Scotty Steiner. Freakzilla himself. Run Boston Bear said, 1980 here, I played outside all day long before pagers showed up. Pagers. Amazing. I'm going to play some music. I think I'm going to have to play music videos and clips here, so we're going to get copyright issues all over the board, but I think I might have to for this stream. We'll see, but there's a couple things I might want to play. I mean, this is actually one of my votes for one of the most 90s music videos. Do you guys want me to play it? We might get shut down. Maybe I'll wait a little longer before we play it so we can actually go over most of the stuff just in case we get shut down for copyright. Even though this is all fair use all the time. So yeah, in terms of pure freedom, yeah, the 80s definitely look free to those in the 90s, and the 90s look pretty free to people today. But what about the 60s? The 60s and early 70s, I mean, the amount of freedom people had, that's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. So he had a point. This older gentleman did have a point about freedom across the board. And also just on a subconscious level, when you're going on a road trip or something, there's no cell phones in the 60s, at least, unless you're on a military base using, their military tech. There are no cell phones. You go on a road trip, you hop on a motorcycle on a cross-country road trip. Even payphones, there's not that many payphones back then. When was the first payphone? Oh, wow. It was 1889, Hartford, Connecticut, at a bank. The first public coin-operated phone. You know what else is interesting? As of February 18th, 2024, there are 100,000 payphone booths left in the U.S. I thought there'd be a lot less than that, actually. I really thought there'd be less left. I mean, every now and then in some, random, photos pop up in these small towns where they still have payphones, outdoor payphones. I thought it would be less than that. There's 100,000 left in the United States. And that's kind of a lot. So in 1957, drive-up payphones were tested in Mobile, Alabama, and Chicago. 1905 was the first outdoor coin payphone in Cincinnati, of all places. Wow, I did not know that. I would not have randomly guessed Cincinnati would have had the first. I would have guessed, like, New York, maybe. So the first cell phone call was made in 1973. It's actually kind of a hilarious story. I'm not going to go too deep into it. But Martin Cooper, senior engineer at Motorola, the first cell phone call ever was him calling a rival telecommunications company. I mean, that's kind of hilarious. The first non-military cell phone call. The first consumer cell phone call was a call from an engineer. This is funny. This is just funny. A Motorola engineer calling a rival. It doesn't say which one, but let me see if I can nail that down. It just says one of the men he'd been competing with to develop the device. So that's all it's... Oh, okay. An engineer said on the phone to... So it was actually to Joel Engel, head of AT&T-owned Bell Labs. So he called Bell... A Motorola engineer called Bell Labs, quote, "I'm calling you on a cell phone. But a real cell phone, a personal handheld portable cell phone." That's just hilarious. Wow, this is creepy. This is so creepy. So Martin Cooper made this call in 1973 while standing on 6th Avenue. Now, someone interviewed him in for this article in 2023. And Cooper said, I was not surprised that everybody has a cell phone." Cooper, now 94 years old in 2023, told CNN, "We used to tell the story then that someday when you're born, you would be assigned a phone number. If you didn't answer the phone, you would die." That's kind of creepy. I mean, that's pretty creepy. But anyway, so yeah, just the level of freedom involved in being able to just hit the road. Nobody can get in contact with you. You can't get in contact with anybody. I mean, that's just a level of freedom that's been lost. Run Boston Bear says, "Dave Weiss invited me to co-host his upcoming space on Friday. What an honor. Come grab a mic." So yeah, freedom-wise, I mean, the 60s has to have the edge on the 70s, which has the edge on the 80s, which has the edge on the 90s. And then the 90s pretty much blows everything after that comes after out of the water. But going back to the comments here. Heracles says, "The 80s were definitely better, but I came of age in the 90s, so they were better for me." Spittertron with an interesting comment here. "It's a nuanced issue, but historically the 80s were better. Pop culture and thereby society was more homogenous. In the 90s was really when society started to atomize. People were pushed into niche tastes for music and television. The console wars were turned up to fracture cohesion in schools." I remember that. "And politics became..." Well, that was... Yeah, I mean, I guess the 90s, because... Yeah. I mean, 80s was all about the Atari, I guess. "And politics became team sports following Bill Clinton. These things were the foundation that led to the vitriol of post-1999 internet culture. The 90s were also the beginning of the downfall of the West due to mass migration from Eastern Europe and Africa, along with the runaway inflation and back-to-back recessions, 91, 92 consumer goods manufacturing export, the 93 to 95 auto manufacturing export, and the 98 to 2000 dot-com burst. 90s raves were also when youth drug use was truly cemented as an accepted part of adolescence." Yeah, that was really sad. I mean, raves were so... If you were around in the 90s, raves were so huge in the 90s, all over the world. You know what I haven't really seen discussed extensively, at least not on non-specific rave discussions, is Goa. And Goa is still kind of like a party capital, but not like it once was. I mean... It was kind of a whole thing. Some people actually think. So, who remembers the movie The Beach? So, The Beach, it was released in 2000, but it was based on the book, which was released in 1996. And that was, of course, set in Thailand. You know what's kind of crazy, though? Like, everything gets ruined when it goes mainstream, doesn't it? There was also another great movie with Claire Danes and I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. The actress from the Underworld, Kate Beckinsale, the actress from the Underworld series. It's actually a pretty solid sci-fi horror series, and it's actually, it really captures the vibe. That movie was, totally forgot the name of that movie. Broke Down Palace. But the whole reason they went to Thailand, I mean, Thailand, I guess, is still popular now, but it's, back then, it's kind of difficult to explain for people that were born post 2000. It's just difficult to explain the state of the world. The easiest way I can kind of say it is there wasn't this jaded smokescreen over everything. Because of the internet and social media and phones, people sharing everything, Instagram, it's like it made everything less mysterious and exciting. Is that a fair way to put it? For the people born pre-2000, like myself, is that a fair way to put it? That just this oversaturation of literally everything. Because when you haven't seen Thailand in a million movies and on social media every 2 seconds, there's something mysterious and alluring about Thailand or any place. Like, you don't have that level of mystery anymore. Like, yeah, if you're a kid and you've never been there, yeah, it might be cool to go, but you've already seen it a million times in the media. So it's not quite the same thing as seeing 1 or 2 photos in a magazine at the grocery store or something like that. Or you saw 1 movie about it. It's just a different, I would call it a jaded smokescreen. That's the best way I can kind of describe it. So it just, nothing has the same excitement level as it did pre-social media. And even pre-widespread internet. Because back in the late 80s, like on BBS boards, I actually don't, the people weren't sharing images. I mean, I think you could. But again, it was a bandwidth issue in the 80s. There were bandwidth issues for the internet. Even in the very early 90s, people weren't posting like photos every 2 seconds just because it's a bandwidth issue. You'd be photos here and there, and almost no videos. Videos was kind of more of a mid-90s thing. But Goa in India was kind of like a big party capital, and it was big with raves, a lot of underground raves. Now, again, post social media, like, what is underground now? There's literally nothing underground now. It's like almost like everything went mainstream to a certain extent, and that ruined everything. Because in the 60s and 70s, there was a certain like hippie level vibe to like not. So for the people that wanted to escape the 9 to 5 rat race, which, you know, I mean, even in 1950s, I mean, most people had jobs. I mean, what was the unemployment rate in the U.S. in the 1950s? Oh wow, it's actually a little higher than I thought. It was 3.1% in 1951, 2.7% in 1952. I thought it was actually lower. The economy grew 37% during the 1950s. That's crazy. But anyway, so the people that wanted to escape the rat race and just, they saw through the problems in society, they went to these places like Goa in India where there were all these raves. I mean, all throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but it got pretty big in the 90s. And then, like everything, it kind of got ruined. I mean, it's still going on, but, or in more modern times, I guess Ibiza would be the better example. Like I don't know what the turnaround year was. Pre 2000, Ibiza was kind of big. Now it's all like commercialized and expensive. But or like college age kids doing a gap year, or in between high school and college they would go, or after graduating college and before starting a job they would go to Goa or Thailand, like in the 80s and 90s, late 80s and then all through the 90s, for, to party and rave on. Or even just in whatever cities they were at, raves were huge. I mean, let's look at a couple of videos. You know, it's a crazy conspiracy: trance music, putting you in a trance. Like in a lot of these places, Goa, Thailand, whatever, people went there, like even college kids that, doing a gap year or whatever, they went there and then they never left. I mean, that was a lot of the culture back then. I mean, you don't really see that happening now too much. And part of the reason I think is just the instant connectivity at all times. Like in the 80s, early 90s, where most people didn't have cell phones, like your parents couldn't expect you to be in touch every 2 seconds. There are also surprisingly not a ton of videos from these time periods, or they're just really low quality. I mean, some of these videos are really interesting because not that people don't party and dance now and all that stuff, but the vibe was just completely different because, again, people were just, they were present, I guess is a good way of putting it. They were in the present moment. And also, it seems like people were just generally a lot happier back then. I'm gonna put it on the screen in a second. Yeah, the quality of a lot of these videos is just really bad, so... I mean, I guess the easiest way to describe this is just, I mean, yeah, you can find, I mean, if you look at modern footages, most of the people on their cell phones or people on their cell phones recording whatever band or DJs on the stage. I guess it's just a certain amount of a carefree vibe. You know, there's no 5G towers at this time. People aren't glued to their cell phones 24/7, so they're communicating with other people. There's just there's just a social level that's completely unlike anything today. People just seem a lot happier. Easiest way to say it. But yeah, obviously in the 90s it did lead to a lot of drug use. But it's kind of hard to say. Is anybody disputing that people had more fun in the 80s and 90s than today? I mean, you did have the early 2000 years, which really weren't that bad. A lot of people say the world went to complete crap after 9/11. Not really. I mean, the rest of 2001, then you had 2002, wasn't horrible. I would say the turning point was probably closer to Instagram, somewhere around 2010, 2011, 2012. I think that's the turning point. Maybe 2012 was an accurate line of demarcation. I mean, there was definitely a slow shift towards that. It was noticeable. You know, 2008, 2009, like that was all noticeable decline. But 2003, I mean, I don't think that was that bad of a year. 2002, rest of 2001, you know, I mean, obviously it was quite somber on 9/11 and the days after, but people still had fun and lived their lives. Fox Undercover did some kind of video on, this was around 1990. I'm going to put it on the screen in a second, but first, we're going to look at some videos of Los Angeles raves here. Old school raves. But I suppose an accurate way of putting it is that everything just got more jaded and less exciting as the years went on. Because the people that lived through the 60s and 70s, I mean, I don't think they're saying that the 80s weren't fun. I mean, they've never claimed the 80s were not fun. They might have preferred the 60s and 70s, but I don't think they had a problem with the 80s. Oh, Wendy in the chat remembers the movie The Beach. Yeah, I mean, because back then it was a lot more exciting to travel. I mean, I traveled some in the 90s, and it was a lot more exciting because you hadn't seen everything a billion times on Instagram already. Like, it was still fresh and exciting. This this is LA. I mean, everybody just seems a lot happier. Is it just me, or are these human beings just looking like they're actually living life? That's a great point, Heracles. 90% of them are in good shape. Yeah, there's not too many obese people back in the 80s and 90s. Maybe going into the late 90s. You know, after a decade or two of eating McDonald's. But yeah, not too many obese people here. Not too many completely tatted up people either. Not that there's anything wrong with tattoos, but it does look a little weird when absolutely everybody's tatted up completely. I'm gonna play a clip on the subject of tattoos. I'm gonna play a clip here that sums this up perfectly. I don't know the exact year. This might have been season 1. So this is 2003, 2004-ish. This is the 90s rave. Yeah, everybody seems happy. Even the crazy hair doesn't seem like an unhinged, woke lefty goof. Like, she still seems like a genuine human being that doesn't have hate in her heart and hasn't been brainwashed by the idiot box, in my opinion. Again, I don't know her, maybe she is, but it just seems like the hair was, actually, this is some kind of character. I don't remember from what movie. I think that's some kind of character. But anyway, they're doing it just for fun, not because of some kind of woke ideology. Like, they're doing it for genuine fun. Everybody has, like, healthier looking skin, too, right? Do you guys remember the conspiracy theory that the sun that's post-2012, it turned white instead of yellow? And back in the 80s, like, 2010 and prior, the sun had cast a yellow light. Now it's a lot less yellow and more white. You guys remember that conspiracy theory? That was doing the rounds for a little bit. But, I mean, it seems like it's kind of hard to dismiss that one, too, just going into your memory. Because I didn't know what to make of that. And then when you see all these older people that were around back in the 50s, they were saying the sun was always yellow. That's why little kids drew the sun yellow on, on all the crayon drawings and everything. Until, I don't think they had an exact year, but they said definitely through the 90s it was yellow. Now is not the same glow of the sun that was pre-2000. I don't know if they gave a year. Some of these people are like in their 70s and 80s and 90s, so I don't know if they can remember the exact year of difference, but they clearly state, all of them that I've seen interviewed, and I asked a few too, they all clearly state there's a distinct difference between the color of the sun pre-2000 and post. It was almost warmer, right? Like warmer and like happier, like everything. Just kind of weird. But let's look at this house clip just regarding tattoos and the ideology behind tattoos. It's really funny. Fair use. Fair use. Whole lot of fair use going on here. We are drowning in fair use.
You know, I really admire the way you don't care what anyone thinks. You just do what you want, the way you want.
So you went to Hopkins for both undergrad and med school?
That's right.
He's in a band.
You into music?
Totally. What kind of music do you play?
Mostly blues, you know. James Cotton, some original stuff.
Oh, dude, you are so hired.
Really?
Not a chance.
Why?
Tattoo.
Wow. Thought you'd be the last person to have a problem with nonconformity.
Nonconformity, right. I can't remember the last time I saw a 20-something kid with a tattoo of an Asian letter on his wrist. You are one wicked free thinker. You want to be a rebel? Stop being cool. Wear a pocket protector like he does and get a haircut. Like the Asian kids who don't leave the library for 20-hour stretches. They're the ones who don't care what you think. Sayonara.
For people who don't watch House, I mean, that was funny. That was one of the first times I think I've heard someone break down the whole tattoo thing. Because once upon a time, tattoos were unique, rare, and edgy. That time is long past. Long past. I mean, basically not having the tattoos is the new tattoos. Alright, let's look at this clip from this Fox special on raves, underground raves. Some cool footage here, too.
The rave
Fair use.
They call it the New Moon Gathering. It's happening far out in the desert.
Everything kind of becomes commercialized. Just look what happened to Burning Man. Like, everything becomes commercialized to the point. I mean, we're not going to get into the Illuminati aspect of, the Illuminati occult aspect of Burning Man, but it became commercialized. Like, back in the day, nobody even knew where these raves were. These were like secret invites only. You gotta know somebody that knows somebody. I'm not saying this was a good idea or that the drug use wasn't rampant. I'm just saying these are people that seem to actually be happy and alive and living in the moment, whereas now you have all these zombified individuals due to all of these injections, cell phones, TikTok attention spans, destroying people's brains, you know, just the ongoing poison of the food, air, water. Not that that wasn't around in previous decades, but everything accumulates. I mean, even here, look, there's really not that many of these people around.
Woodstock.
Remember those
Dancers,
old 90s
psychedelic hairdos,
effects, like in camcorder effects? That guy kind of looks like Brian Austin Green from 90210. Is that like the pastel in camcorder effect? I think I played this clip, this other clip of high school throughout the years. Did I play this clip? Let me see if I still have it. I think I played it on one of the other lives. I think I played it. Or did I not play it and that was just I just posted it in the community tab. Let me double check. Maybe that was it. Oh yeah, maybe I didn't, I just posted it, we didn't go, yeah, we might have not gone over it. Okay, so I'll play it now. It's actually a pretty cool video, because it's 1970 to 2020. Do you guys want to listen to it with the music and increase our chances of getting shut down? Or are you okay listening without the music? I think we need the music, we'll do the music. Fair use. I don't think for some reason, like, fair use, they don't seem to like fair use on super popular music. But I believe these songs were chosen to represent the years, so they're kind of relevant. So let's watch this, and then we can reflect. Oh, that kid was so mean knocking her books out like that. And her friend laughing at her. See, I have another theory. I haven't quite phrased it like this before. But all the people in the chat, let me know what you think about this. Not only were people happier back then, but would this be a fair way to phrase it? They were real, genuine people. Because now, with just the oversaturation of all media, whether it's movies, TV shows, Instagram all the time, the youth is basically psyoped with all these different personalities. They don't even know who they are. I mean, look at the mental health crisis over the past few decades. Now, there's obviously other reasons for it. But is one of the reasons the oversaturation of media where they're seeing literally hundreds, if not thousands, of other human characters acting in specific ways where they don't get to develop their own personality? Again, not that you don't see real, genuine joy these days. You do. It just seems to be such a fraction of what it once was. Such a fraction of what was once the status quo. Now, a lot of that I think also has to do with not just physical fitness. Not that you have to be fit, but there's a difference between being obese and non-athletic. And, like, let's say none of these individuals on screen here are athletes, and maybe they don't even work out, but their general physical health seems to be a lot better than the average teenager today, both mental and physical. Another observation that could have a lot to do with this is that also people spent a lot more time outdoors until, I don't know, I guess the early 2000s. Like, once computers and the internet really took off, it seems like and video games got even more popular, a lot of people spent more and more time indoors. So obviously lack of vitamin D leads to depression and all these mental and physical health issues. So that could be a factor as well. And you can see here, going into the late 90s, computer radiation, etc., the vibe already, you can already start noticing the vibe getting more lethargic, the pure joy subsiding. The vibe is considerably different here once you have computer labs in schools. What does everybody think of the shift? Like, it seems like right before our eyes, we saw, like, the carefree, fun nature of life, especially in high school. We saw it, like, the 70s looked like they were a little bit more uptight, a little bit. And then the 80s were just all fun and awesomeness, and the early 90s. And then getting into the late 90s and the 2000s, it seems like it's more angsty, a little bit more lethargic, a little bit more suppressed. Call me crazy, but is it just me, or can we noticeably see less pep in the step by the time we get to 2006? Is that just me? I mean, let's go through it here. Like, look at the way they're walking here. A little bit more lethargic, a lot more heavier. You start seeing more and more heavier students. I mean, look at the swagger. I mean, look at this swagger look at the swagger here compared to, where were we, compared to this little march here. I mean, look at that. The pep in the step is all gone. I mean, just look at this amazing swagger. I mean, people are just like walking with a purpose, walking with energy, walking with excitement. I mean, it's just like their cells are like bustling with energy. And then compare that to like the marches here. I mean, yeah, obviously this is, this isn't a large enough sample size. It's definitely not a large enough sample size. I'm not saying it's large enough. But look at even their facial expressions. I mean, it's just like the zombification is in full swing by 06. And again, computer labs started in schools in the late 90s. Now, again, you start seeing more heavyset people, but look at, like, the lack of masculinity in this individual. Now, he has a goatee, but everything from the posture, I mean, it looks like the soy levels in males really started to rise around this time as well. Again, call me crazy, but even these happy girls right here, is it just me, or do they seem... I'm not saying they're taking any kind of antidepressants or anything, although we don't know, but doesn't it seem like they're just suppressed and lethargic, even though they're happy? even though their mood is good. Compare that with the sheer joy emanating from some of these kids in previous decades. Like, there's just a distinct difference in people being smiling and happy, just standing around being smiling and happy in the pre-2000s, and then now look at them. Like, even though they're relatively happy here, they're relatively happy, but it seems like they're like zombified and lethargic compared to the previous decades. Now we're getting a bit of a bigger sample size. Look at this zombie march compared to the pep in the step here. I mean, just look at the way like these students just move around in previous decades, just walking down the hall even. I mean, just look at the pep in the step. I mean, that was so mean. That kid is such a... But anyway, just the pep in the step. The pep in the step. I mean, it's a completely different universe of people just simply walking back then versus post 2000. Like, look at this walk here. Just look at this walk. I mean, it's like a bunch of zombies. And this is only 2009. We're not even post-COVID. Just look at how miserable everybody looks. I mean, nobody ever liked school in general, for the most part, other than the nerds, but... I mean, look how miserable everybody looks. And this is only 09. And even when the kids are happy and in a good mood, it's almost like a zombified good mood. Because again, look at just the sheer energy and joy just bouncing off of these people. I mean, just look at it's the vibrancy. I mean, it's crazy. Again, I guess another word you could use is vibrancy. I mean, just the sheer joy it's crazy how it's just vibrating through them so obviously. Like, it's a completely different dimension of joy than even the kids that happen to be smiling and having a good time. It just seems so suppressed. Even when they're happy, it's like a suppressed happiness. I mean, I guess a lot of it is the fluoride stare as well, the fluoride eyes. Like, you could still kind of laugh and have a good time with fluoride eyes, but yeah, I mean, the fluoride levels, the chemical injection levels all grow exponentially. And for the goofs that hallucinate, I'm probably going to get banned for putting this image up. This is straight from the CDC. I'm going to put it up. Because it might be relevant here. Again, I don't claim anything is true or untrue. I'm saying it might be relevant. I don't know if it is or isn't relevant. But these are the vaccination rates in 1985. This is of all humans. So this is mostly adults. So only approximately half even have polio as late as 1985. For all the brain dead goofs that are saying, I mean, it's straight from cdc.gov here. For the clueless goofs hallucinating that the polio injection got rid of all of this, only approximately half of people were even injected as of 1985, and 0% for all these other injections. So perhaps that has just a little tiny bit to do with what we're seeing on the screen here. Or perhaps not. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. Yeah, there's something in the soy levels because it just seems like all of them are just so lethargic. Lethargic and suppressed. So even when they're happy and laughing, I mean, it looks nothing like the pure joy emanating here. I mean, it's so crazy, isn't it? I mean, look at the pep in the step. I mean, just look at how these people are walking. And look, the girl didn't even get that upset about that scumbag that knocked her foot over. She didn't start crying. I mean, just look at the sheer joy here. Like, people are actually moving in a non-lethargic fashion. I mean, look at this. They're moving, they have a pep in their step. That's a way to put it. And then just look at the zombification. Just the absolute zombification, fluoridation, injectification, or whatever happened here. I mean, this group right here perfectly illustrates the plummeting testosterone levels, doesn't it? I'm going to put something up on the screen here, which is kind of crazy. I mean, this is really crazy. It looks like most of the plummet actually happened recently. I mean, it just nose dove off a cliff here. I mean, look at the testosterone level here. 99 to 2000. I mean, I'll get the bigger one, but look at this plummet. Look at this nosedive. You know what's kind of crazy? This perfectly matches what I just opened up this podcast with, doesn't it? Because I said 2002, 2003 was still okay. 2011, 2012, the rise of Instagram. Look at this plummet. I mean, this went off a cliff. This went off a cliff. I mean, it's kind of almost shocking that there was any kind of recovery here. I mean, that's kind of weird. But look at this plummet. Look at this cliff plummet. I mean, this is rise of MySpace and YouTube as well. Or was it Facebook, rather? Facebook came out in 04. Yeah, it's Facebook. MySpace came out in 03. Wow. I actually thought it was earlier. Huh. Supposedly MySpace only launched in 2003. Okay. So MySpace and Facebook come out. Look at this plummet. I mean, what else happened in 0304? I mean, look at this sheer plummet. And this group right here is a perfect representation of that. I mean, look at this. There's no masculinity to be found in this group of high schoolers in, what is this, 2010, 2011? I mean, just look at this plummet, this sheer plummet. I mean, can we simplify this and really say that the end of that just the decline in civilization is solely because of the precipitous drop in testosterone levels? Okay, so I have a larger chart here. YouTube, of course, lagging like crazy now. Maybe we touched. Maybe this is the. Well, maybe we're onto something here. YouTube just started lagging like crazy. Let's see if I can get this image on the screen. I mean, looking at worldwide stats too, it looks like there was mass decline across the whole world in 2000. But this is United States only. So it's kind of interesting. It's it's almost like a stock chart. There's some recovery here. This is data compiled from hundreds of different studies, so not a single study. So you have from 1960, it drops a little for the 70s, recovers into the 80s, and so a major drop from, looks like 85. Somewhere around 82, 83, 85. It drops to 1990, continues dropping to 96, 97, slight recovery to 2000. I mean, this is quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, this is quite interesting. Wendy Howard says the schooling system was set up to fail most of us. Jeff Hunt says 2008 was Obamacare. Oh, wow. Okay. Very interestingly titled. I don't know why I found that so funny, but wow. So, wow. Okay, so are you saying Obama didn't just tank the economy as it's never been tanked before, but he also tanked testosterone? I mean, this man holds, well, I shouldn't say man, should I? I don't know how he identifies as. But, I mean, this individual really has a lot of records, doesn't he? I mean, this individual was able to rack up more debt than all 43 presidents combined. I mean, that's impressive. That's impressive. I mean, this is an impressive individual. I mean, who else got the Nobel Peace Prize and dropped a bomb every 20 minutes for 8 years with a record number of wars? Just record initiation of wars. I mean, this genocidal war criminal, I mean, he's ahead of everybody. I mean, look at this impressive record here. I mean, this is incredible. This is incredible. Oh, yeah. Also, oh, yeah, we have, man, this guy deserves a lot of credit for a lot of things. I forgot about that. Yeah, let's look at this here. So in 2012, Obama modernized the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, legalizing domestic propaganda. And coincidentally, there's a huge spike in school shootings and mass shootings. I mean, how many records does this guy have? What an impressive presidency. I mean, if you're trying to destroy the entire country, I mean, this guy's made more progress to destruction than I think anybody else. I mean, who else can claim this much economic deficit, this much health deficit, this many bombs dropped on children? I mean, who else can claim these kinds of records here? I mean, who else can get a peace prize and then bomb children in this many countries simultaneously? I mean, this is impressive stuff. He's killing children abroad. He's legalizing or modernizing Smith-Mundt Act of 48, having all these children killed in mass shootings and school shootings here. I mean, is there anything this guy can't do to destroy? I mean, this guy's like a master of destruction. Has any other president had this many scandals? I mean, this is impressive stuff here. I mean, to be this, I mean, I don't think people say he's incompetent. I mean, it's like getting every single answer wrong on a test. It has to be intentional, right? I mean, again, I don't know. I'm just saying, is it possible? Does it seem more likely to be intentional? Or is he simply just the most incompetent individual? Is his mental disability that severe? Wow, Wendy Howard said, he did say he was fundamentally going to change the country. Wow. He lived up to that, didn't he? Fundamental change. Joyce B says his citizenship is questionable as well. Yes, we went over all that. I actually did a whole podcast on where Obama was born. And there's actually, I need to do a follow-up episode on that, because apparently it does matter. At the time, because his mother wasn't 18 for a long enough period of time, he actually would not have had U.S. citizenship even though he was born to a U.S. citizen. That was a caveat of naturalization law. I actually didn't go over that, Joyce B., in the podcast. I need to do a part 2. I only started looking through the documentation a little deeper after the fact, because I was kind of thinking, if the original Illuminati plan was not for him to be president, why would they hide that he was born in Kenya? That's why it was publicized everywhere. Then apparently there was some kind of change, and then they did, I think it was Clinton actually changed that naturalization law to where it doesn't matter how old the United States citizen is. their child born overseas will still be a U.S. citizen. But at the time Obama was born, if the mother on his official on whatever, I don't know if his birth certificate is official, but who is officially known as his mother, with all that family's CIA connections, she would have had to have been older than she was in order to convey citizenship to someone born overseas. Okay, so let's get off of this scumbag. Oh, the only reason we got on it is because who mentioned Obamacare? So you have this huge drop for Obamacare. But to be fair, there's another huge drop in the 80s. I wonder if that was simply all of the additives in the rise of fast food and the popularization of breakfast cereals and all of this fast food and processed foods. Because in the 70s, they were still around, but in the 80s, they got a lot more popular, and definitely in the 90s. That probably has something to do with it. Let's finish this video. I mean, look at this, the lack of masculinity here. I mean, look at the men here in some of these older clips here. Actually, they don't even look that masculine either, but I mean, it also depends on the age. I mean, obviously, 15-year-old usually. Yeah, I mean, they're not really, that's definitely not masculine either. Yeah, I mean, we don't really have great examples here. Not in these videos. I mean, there's plenty of other videos. Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't know. Hard to get a big enough sample size here. I mean, just quite a plummet in testosterone levels anyway, whether they're apparent or not. I mean, it's just kind of tough because the other thing nobody really talks about is the genetic damage. So by 2019 here, even by the 2000s, the parents of these children have had X amount of injections. They've been exposed to a lot more chemicals, air, food, water, than their parents and their grandparents. So the amount of genetic damage present here in the DNA of high schoolers post-2000 is considerably more than pre. So it's not just the exposure of these humans, but their parents and what is coded, what the genetic damage that's accumulated and then passed on to the next generation. But yeah, I mean, it's just sad watching the video because just look at how happy everybody used to be. Just like happiness and pure joy seemed to be the standard. Like for everybody, like the people in the background, just the way they walk with the pep in the step that just has completely disappeared, you know, going into the 2000s there. I mean, just completely gone. Jeff Hunt says, different world, yeah. Completely different. I mean, many different worlds. Many different worlds. I mean, now there's kids flipping water bottles and riding scooters, where back in the day, before all of the mass shootings, back in the day, I mean, this is what you had. You had rifle clubs at school. You had kids having rifles and shotguns in their cars when they were in the parking lot. These guys don't look that soy infused, do they? I mean, other than the kid in the bottom right and the kid on the top right who looks like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, other than the two guys on the right, the top and bottom row, the rest of them look fairly masculine. I think it's the bow tie. Is that a bow tie on the guy in the bottom right? Not a good look. And the guy on the top right, that just looks like Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory. Definitely not masculine. But I mean, this is how the world used to be. And then now we have what we have now. Quite sad. Quite sad indeed. There's one more video that's really cool. I don't think I could find it last time. Yeah, man, I should have saved it. How did I not save it? Oh, now I really want to find it. It was such a great video. I don't know, everything from the sun being yellow to everybody being more joyous and less lethargic, more physically and mentally healthy. I mean, it's all of these factors. And by that logic, we might have to crown the 80s the superior decade. I mean, it's tough though. It's really tough. Matari Sensei says, isn't the 80s when those feminine rock stars started gaining popularity? Yeah, I mean, a lot of psyops started in the 80s. I mean, there were psyops in the 70s as well. Yeah, I mean, psyops definitely started gaining ground in the 80s. Everything started being psyop, but because there wasn't social media, it didn't have the speed that it does now, like the snowball effect that it has now. Jeff Hunt says, those boys probably still have them rifles. I mean, I don't know what year this is here. Could be 60s, 70s, maybe even early 80s. I can't tell because it's black and white, but... I mean, those are some really old school rifles. I mean, I guess it's possible this is the 50s. I mean, dressed like that, I don't think it's the 80s, and I don't think it's even the late 70s. I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends on where it is. Yeah, MTV. Wow. Yeah, MTV rotted a lot of minds. You know, it's kind of crazy looking back at it now. Oh, you know what? You know what's another possibility for the beginning of the end? Yeah, let me put it on the screen. Here's another possibility for the beginning of the end. Man, YouTube is just so laggy. It's crazy. Ugh. I mean, it's just so annoying. Just give me a second. If anybody in the chat can guess what I'm about to put on the screen, bonus points. Let's see if anybody guessed what I'm about to put on the screen. This might have been the beginning of the end. Alright, hold on. Let me see if anybody guessed it. MT40 says Springer. No, not Springer. Jeff Hunt says breakdancing popped up in the middle of the makeup hairspray day. Hey, don't you hate on breakdancing. Breakdancing is awesome. Unless you're talking about the recent breakdancing in the Olympics. Was this the beginning of the end? Right here. Did this nosedive what was once peak human civilization? Original release May 21st, 1992 on MTV. Because there's a certain normalization of degeneracy that happens in reality television that's a little bit different than non-reality television. Because the normalization of degeneracy and promiscuity, you could argue that also caused a precipitous decline in what was once peak human civilization. You know what's kind of crazy though? Like, all of this could have been used for good instead, right? Because if you had so-called based individuals with strong morals, they could have literally inspired, developing strong character instead of just the constant promotion of degeneracy. Jeff Hunt says, this realm could be so cool without all the Vipers. Yeah, I mean, it really could be. I mean, can you imagine if Hollywood, there was no Operation Mockingbird, there was no CIA psyops, like, you had genuinely talented, good-hearted human beings promoting positive media? Now, I guess not that you even need it. I mean, I guess without the evil, you don't even need it. I mean, a lot of the tools of the media and technology are used to combat the evil, but if the evil never existed, I guess you wouldn't really need it anyway, but still. Alright, so let's continue our breakdown here. I mean, the more I go over this, like, I was leaning 90s. I'm kind of leaning 80s now. I'm kind of leaning 80s. Like one of the reasons that the 90s seems so awesome is just because of where we are now. But if we were in the middle of the 80s right now, would we rather be in the middle of the 90s? I guess that's the question we need to ask. Actually, let me do a poll of that. So if you answer no, that means you're voting for the 80s being the best decade. It gets a little nuanced because 1990, I guess, 1990 was kind of awesome. I guess we can't hate on 1990, possibly not even 91. All right, vote in the poll. So if we were in the mid 90s, would we like where we were? Or would we rather be in the... So again, having all the knowledge we have now. So we're all teleported from 2024. We're teleported to the 80s. Knowing full well what the 90s were like. Do we want to be in the 90s instead of the 80s? It would also be a kind of crazy question if we got teleported to the 90s, to the mid 90s, would we rather be in the 80s at the moment we're in the mid? I don't know. You know what? Let me throw up one of the most 90s music videos ever. Fair use. Fair use. Fair use. For those who haven't heard this song since release, prepare for a blast to the past. I rediscovered this song maybe, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and when I first heard it upon rediscovery, because it just hasn't been that popular the past 20 plus years. It's not like one of these other songs from the 80s and 90s that's always been super popular. It was probably close to 20 years that I hadn't heard it. Maybe a little less. And it was a massive blast from the past, so I hope everybody's sitting down for this, because we're about to be transported back to the early 90s. And I'm putting up the music video, so if you can, watch the screen, because that's a big part of the experience. Okay, so we have 71% voted no, that if we got transported to the 80s, we would want to go to the 90s. Yes, synth is the best. Sigma LaFleur, I was born in 92, but I love the 80s synthwave vibe, mainly from Miami Vice. Yeah, and I mentioned this before, Miami Vice is one of the only TV shows... Are you talking about Vice City, the GTA game, or the Miami Vice, the TV series? Miami Vice, the TV series, is one of the only series that actually holds up today. Like, I went back and I rewatched, like, pieces of episodes from many different shows. Miami Vice is one of the only shows that actually holds up. So we do have a few people that would rather be in the 90s than the 80s, and can you mention why? We got 29% voted they would rather be in the mid-90s. So if we got teleported to the 80s right now, they would rather be in the 90s. 75% would rather be in the 80s. Jeff Hunt, how dare you? 80s cars sucked, though. How dare you? There weren't as many cool cars as the 90s, but there were still plenty of cool cars. Ferraris and Lambos. Okay, so I hope everybody buckle up. We're taking a stroll through memory lane here in one of the most 90s songs of all time. And if you're like me and you hadn't heard it for one or two, more than a decade, possibly close to 2 decades, it's gonna have an impact.
That old dog has chained you up alright. Give you everything you need to live inside a twisted cage. Sleep inside an empty rage. I had a dream I was your hero. Damn, I wish I was your lover. I'd rock you till the daylight comes. Made sure you are smiling and warm. I am everything. Tonight I'll be your mother. I'll do such things to ease your pain. Free your mind and you won't feel ashamed. Oh, open up, 'cause the inside gonna fill you up, gonna make you cry. This monkey can't stand to see you black and blue. I give you something sweet each time you come inside my jungle book. But is it just too good? Don't say you'll stay, 'cause then you'll go away. Damn, I wish I was your lover. I'll rock you till the daylight comes. Make sure you are smiling and warm. I am everything. Tonight I'll be your mother. I'll do such things to ease your pain. Free your mind and you won't feel ashamed. Shucks, for me there is no other. You're the only shoe that fits. I can't imagine I'll grow out of it. Damn, I wish I was your lover. Yeah. If I was your girl, believe me, I'd turn on the Rolling Stones. We could move along as if it was better.
I mean, that song was everywhere in the 90s, the mid to late 90s. And there's something just genuine about the video, about just the way she sings, like with actual passion instead of just to make money like everybody these days. I mentioned this in a thread before too, that Soulja Boy might have been just the downfall at the beginning of the end of music. Just the rise of mumble rap and all that nonsense. But yeah, who hasn't heard this song in many decades? And notice how I mean, this is literally probably, I mean, some of the lyrics aside, what is it, like a rated G, PG video, music video? When's the last time you saw one of those? Without all, like, the drugs and the hookers and all that stuff. I mean, 90s did have a lot of grunge, so, I mean, just the grunge fashion, grunge vibe, the rise of grunge. So, I don't know, the more we go over this, the more I'm starting to lean 80s. Although, I get maybe 1990. 1990 might be peak civilization, if we had to pick a single year. Maybe even 91. Sigma LaFleur in the chat says, both decades were awesome indeed, genuine vibes. Alright, let me continue going through the comments here. So Spittertron was the one who's posting about society being more homogen. Oh, there was one video I wanted to play I still didn't find. Hold on. I gotta get that video. And for everybody who just got here, the mic sounds better. I did an audio adjustment. This was the second option that everybody picked that sounds better. Actually, I have another chart here, which is interesting. The amount of... Okay, actually, I won't say what it is. I'll just put it on the screen. So we have people at the highest levels of happiness the highest levels of happiness did not change despite increase in pay. That's curious, isn't it? So this would put peak or not necessarily peak civilization, but prior to the 50s, it seemed like people the average person might not have had enough money to be happy. But 50 to 60, it seemed that was achieved. 50, 60, 70, and then it stayed achieved. And that's another thing, too. The amount of hours worked increased. People, like the amount of people working at their job. I want to get a chart up for that, but it's actually kind of tough. I don't... The UK, for some reason, is a lot easier to get the UK stats. UK stats are everywhere. We got Japanese stats all over the place. We have U.S. work hours in the previous years. Why are these not... Okay. You got countries with 4-day work weeks. We got the average amount of hours the refrigerator is on per year going back to the 20s. Okay, so the U.S. Huh. U.S. actually has been pretty consistent. Interesting. I don't know. I can't really get hours by wage. For some reason, it's surprisingly difficult. Surprisingly difficult to get only U.S. per decade. Okay, I found something. Average working hours. Okay. Let's see if there's some kind of overlap here. Okay. So, 1970. We need to go back beyond the 70s, though. There's a drop in work hours, which is interesting. And then I guess 2008, a lot of people lost their jobs, so a lot less working hours going on there. So we apparently haven't even rebounded to late 90s work hours. Huh. A lot of people never went back to work, so. Oh, I found the video I was looking for. Fantastic. Okay, perfect. Let's look at what the 80s were like. Another great video on what the 80s were like. But what does everybody think of this? That increase in income did not increase happiness. Now, obviously, this, there's the outliers, there's the opposite ends of the spectrum where those in poverty or near poverty are happier with more money. But when you reach a certain amount of money, even more money does not increase your happiness. Especially the other nuanced thing is here, the amount of time and energy it takes to maintain the higher income can also rob you of happiness. So even though you can afford everything you want, you were lacking happiness because you couldn't before, now you're lacking happiness even though you can afford everything you want, but the amount of time and energy it takes to sustain the new salary robs you of happiness. Jeff Hunt says, 2,000-mile trip in a 66 Lincoln convertible with flip-flops and gas money. Those were the days. Yeah, the other thing, there was a lot more spontaneity back then as well. It's like, oh, let's go on a trip. I mean, how many people do that today? I mean, yes, some people still, but just the average person doesn't really have the fun of the spontaneity. All right, so let's check out this video on just the vibe of movies. If you've been on Twitter, you've probably seen it. It was kind of making the rounds a little while back. Even people getting tickets by the Popo seemed happier.
Don't want to grow old too fast.
Also, back in the days when you could actually sleep in your car without getting hassled. Yeah, completely different world back then. And all the neon colors is kind of awesome too. I don't know the exact year here. It actually looks like it possibly could also be early 90s. It might even be, it's probably between 88 and 92, if I had to guess. Maybe 89. But yeah, okay. That dog definitely seems happy. Jeff Hunt says, to be fair, they weren't selling fentanyl at every gas station. Yeah, but, I mean, even looking at all the videos of the high school students, you know, they're not on fentanyl, and they're still zombified. I don't think we can blame it all on the fentanyl. In fact, we might be able to say people are doing more drugs because they need to cope with their unhappiness more than people did in the 80s, even though there was a lot of drug use in the 80s. But the reason for the drug use was different in the 80s. It wasn't to cope with their unhappiness, it was to try to get to even more happy. I would say late 90s going into 2000, the reason for the drug use changed. Coley Cole responded to Spittertron with the comment regarding the homogenous society, and then going into post-1999 internet culture with niche society, there's the fracture of everything and everything becoming niched. Coley Cole responded, that was brilliant, never thought of it like that. The 90s to me was a lot of good balancing the bad. The 2000s began a lot of bad overbalancing the good. That's a good way to put it as well. Him Snake says, gangsta rap, rap rock, and new metal ruined the 90s. The 80s just holds up better, and in my opinion was the peak of American culture. What do people think about that statement? It's actually another video I was gonna play here. See if I can find it. I just had this other video, which was pretty cool too. This video is titled Summertime in the 80s. Let's check it out. I think also just collectively, when most people are physically and mentally happy, that kind of just vibrates through the entire society. So that might have something to do with it as well. And again, regarding the beach, I mean, these are people out there living their lives instead of a bunch of obese people stuck on their cell phone. Dope Man says, MK Ultra hit me hard. I was addicted to gangster rap in early 2000s, Eminem and Gun It. I don't know who Gun It is. What's Gun It? Never heard of Gun It. Never a fan of Eminem except for maybe 2 or 3 songs. In my opinion, the Wigger act got old by then. Give me Vanilla Ice any day of the week, baby. Vanilla Ice. Heracles says, the mind-blowing variety of 80s music is unrivaled. Yeah, I mean, not just music. Look at the movies. I mean, you had every genre. Was kind of in the 80s, you had every genre just phenomenal. I mean, you had comedies, action movies, sci-fi, horror, the horror renaissance. I mean, it was crazy. So here's my response to... This is my response to that comment. Technically, gangsta rap came out in the 80s with Ice-T. Music, however large, is only one component. Most of the real garbage started being churned out post-2000s. Can even argue early 2000s wasn't even that bad. Also, late 80s, early 90s is quite distinct and different from early 80s and late 90s. So it can definitely be difficult to quantify when confining to a single decade. Because, yeah, the year 1990 was not that different from 89 or even 88. But it was a whole... But 89 and even 88 and even 85 is a whole lot different than 1980 or even 81. So, I mean, we have to keep that in mind as well. Sonny said, totally agree. In my opinion, it all ended as soon as that plane hit the World Trade Center. I don't know, man. I don't know. I think the wheels were already in motion before then, and I think there was still some happiness to be had after that. Shark Dog 32 DAWG says 89 was the best year. Definitely a candidate. I'm going 88. Now, it's just so tough. It's so tough. Because I think you probably did have quite a bit more freedom in 1980 and 1981 than you did in 89. Then again, we have this absolute masterpiece in 1989. This absolute masterpiece, when the one and only, the great one, the man, the myth, the legend, one of the greatest human beings who has ever lived, Only Steven Seagal can possibly hold a candle to this guy's output on the music level anyway. This incredible individual in the field of entertainment, the most prolific entertainer to possibly ever live in the history of existence. This is, of course, the one and only dramatic pause. Further dramatic pause. Even further dramatic pause. Does anybody in the chat know what's about to come on the screen? Uh-oh, I think somebody might know. Somebody might know in what happened in this glorious year.
One morning in June, some 20 years ago, I was born a rich man's son. I had everything that money could buy, but freedom I had none. I've been looking for freedom. I've been looking so long. I've been looking for freedom. Still the search goes on. I've been looking for freedom.
The one and only David Hasselhoff in 1989, with his literally electrifying jacket, single-handedly bringing down the Berlin Wall and ending the Cold War, ushering in the next era of humanity. The Hoff, the one, the only, David Hasselhoff. Here he is on location, bringing down the Berlin Wall. Does anybody see an army with him? Does anybody see anyone assisting the Hoff as the Hoff single-handedly brings down the Berlin Wall? Shifty Eyes Shady saying, "How did I miss this?" Are you saying you don't follow Hasselhoff's entire career, music, TV series, movies, radio shows, theatrical performances? Are you saying you don't follow each and every one of the Hoff's careers? How dare you? How dare you? Heracles asked, "Have you ever played the Yuri Bezmenov explanation of the International Communist Plan, Why the Wall Fell?" I think that was his name. Who do you think Yuri answers to, my friend? Clearly the Hoff has the final say. Clearly the one and only Hoff. I mean, the only person that could possibly have nixed this thing is Steven Seagal. But, I mean, as long as Steven Seagal didn't have a problem with the Hoff bringing down the wall by singing Looking for Freedom, then the wall would come down.
Worked on the farm, got some muscle in my arm. Still I'm not a self-made man. I'll be on the run for many years to come. I'll be searching door to door and giving some time. Someday I'm gonna find the freedom I've been searching for. I've been looking for freedom. I've been looking so long. I've been looking for freedom. Still the search goes on. I've been looking for freedom since I left my hometown. I've been looking for freedom. Still it can't be found. I've been looking for freedom. I've been looking so long. I've been looking for freedom. Still the search goes on. I've been looking for freedom since I left my hometown. I've been looking for freedom. Still it can't be found.
I mean, this is how you know everything is rigged. I mean, how this man doesn't have all of these Academy Awards, Grammy Awards. Nobody even credits him with bringing down the wall. I mean, this man single-handedly brought down the Berlin Wall. Nobody gives him credit for it. That's how you know he's the real GOAT. That's how you know. That's how you know, because otherwise the establishment only props up the frauds. When you have real legends like David Hasselhoff not getting credit, that's how you know. That's how you know. I mean, the Hoff was a pioneer in so many areas. I mean, let's look at this other legendary song by the Hoff. And let's look at this video. I mean, this is one of the greatest music videos in the history of reality. I mean, how this didn't absolutely sweep all awards. I mean, there's not a single music. What is Taylor Swift winning some kind of music video awards these days? Nothing that goof does can hold a handle to the greatness, to the absolute greatness that is the Hoff. Immortal. This will be immortalized forever in music. I mean, I don't even know if I could think of a music video more legendary than the one I'm about to put on the screen.
I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me. Girl, you just don't realize what you do to me. When you hold me in your arms so tight, you let me know everything's alright. I'm hooked on a feeling, and I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. It's as sweet as candy, your taste
mean, has anybody seen a music video more epic than this? I mean, this was 1997, by the way, so it's a tough call. I mean, the Hoff dominates the 80s. Knight Rider, bringing down the Berlin Wall. And now, then he went on to dominate the 90s, Baywatch. And let's not forget Baywatch Nights, one of the greatest TV series in the history of existence, blending the detective, the PI genre with the supernatural in unprecedented fashion, while simultaneously recording many different albums and simultaneously performing live concerts, touring international sold-out tours while shooting 2 TV series simultaneously and still recording albums. Who can rival the output of David Hasselhoff? I'm not even sure Steven Seagal can rival this kind of output, although to be fair, he's out there mastering all these all these martial arts and all that. But I mean, look at how epic is this music video. You have the Hoff literally flying. Look at those flaps. Look at those arm flaps. Who else can arm flap in a music video with the grace, the epic grace of the Hoff? I mean, we need to replay these flaps.
For another cup of wine. Got a buzz from you, girl.
These other goofs that make video words. I mean, look at this. The Hoff is flapping in a trench coat while flying in the sky. I mean, this is absolutely unrivaled.
If I can't be sure all the good love when we're all alone, keep it up, girl. Yeah, you turn me on. I'm hooked on a feeling, and I'm believing that you're in love with me. Hooked on a feeling.
I mean, look at these daredevil stunts, these absolutely stunning landscapes. I mean, who can hold a candle to David Hasselhoff and this incredible music video production? I mean, who else has dominated 2 decades? 2 decades of dominance. I mean, Seagal only had Above the Law in what was that? That was 88. And I don't think he even came out with a movie in 89. So he really was more of a 90s domination. Here you have the Hoff fully dominating 2 full decades. 2 decades of dominance. I mean, look at these stunts. Not even the one and only bonus points for anybody who can guess what I'm about to bring up right now. Oh man, one of the greatest TV series of all time, another great 90s TV series, is of course the show Renegade with the one and only Lorenzo Lamas. But not even Lorenzo Lamas could perform these kinds of motorcycle stunts that the Hoff is performing. Not even Lorenzo Lamas. I actually did a whole 2-hour plus podcast on the Hoff and his incredible life. You should check that out, Axis Mundi, and whoever else hasn't done their the Hoff deep dives. But not even Lorenzo Lamas, one of the unheralded greats of action cinema and TV, could have these kinds of motorcycle skills that the Hoff has.
Love with me, yeah. all the good times. When we're all alone, keep it up, girl. Yeah, you turn me on. I'm hooked on a feeling, and I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. I'm hooked on a feeling, and I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. Hooked on a feeling, I'm hooked on a feeling, I'm believing.
I'm not going to turn this into a Hoff showcase, but I have one more music video I want to go over to just showcase the greatness that is the Hoff for those that don't know. I mean, I don't know how anybody could have not seen the MINDSHOCK David Hasselhoff episode. We went over a few of these, but I mean, the greatness that is the Hoff is absolutely unrivaled in the field of music and music videos.
Jump in my car. I wanna take you home. Come on and jump in my car. It's too far to walk on your own.
No, thank you, sir.
Oh, come on, I'm just where they got
No,
it.
thank you, sir.
Oh, little girl, I wouldn't tell you no
I
lie.
know you're gay.
How can you say that we've only just met?
You're not the same.
Ooh, she's got me there, but I get her yet.
I got you there.
No, you didn't. I was catching my breath, and look, it's starting to rain, and baby, you'll catch your death.
Well, I don't know.
Oh, come on, it costs nothing to try, and you're the ride home nice and dry. Ooh, jump in my car. I wanna take you home. Jump in my car. It's too far to walk on your own. Oh yeah. Come on, girl. Come on. I got a hot ride here. This car talks. Jump in my car. I wanna take you home. Come on and jump in my car. It's way too far to walk on your own.
I lay down south
Get out of my car.
stoking. You got no right to speak.
Get out of my car.
You told me that you were a really nice guy.
Well, I ain't. Yeah, get out of my car. Get out. Get out of my car.
Get her out of here. Ooh, hope she's okay.
I mean, how hilarious is that? Jump in my car, get out of my car. I mean, in a woke society, they probably wouldn't make this music video. But the Hoff exposes the clueless goofery. He exposes clueless goofery. This was also 2006. The Hoff continuing his dominance into the new millennia. And for many years to come. He also has conspiracy in it and metal songs, but I don't want to get too sidetracked here because this is about the 80s and 90s. So that was our aside. But check out the David Hasselhoff episode. I actually go through all those music videos. All right, so let's go back. Where were we with this breakdown here? So Shark Dog 32 says 89 was the best year ever. 750 Donuts of Doom. It's a shame some of these some of these listeners aren't in the live chat right now. Only those who have never really experienced the 80s would pick the 90s. I'm not sure about that. I go back and forth. If I had to pick a single year, I mean, it's so tough. If you're going more on the freedom side, 1980 or 81. If you're going more where you want some of the technology, but before it went crazy, then you can go 88, 89. But if you want just the balance of everything, it might be hard to pick against 1990 or even 91, because then you even have the internet. So, yeah, I mean, 1990 might be peak civilization, because it's nice to have the internet, but it's not everywhere. So you have to really go out of your way to get to be on the internet for a small period of time, but it's still there. It's still there, and it didn't take over anything. David Williams says, at 66 years old, the 70s clearly best decade in my past. 80s was worse for me, lost my union job, and jobs was hard to find in my state then. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's anecdotes of all kind. There were some people who were miserable in the 60s, happy in the 70s, miserable in the 70s, happy in the 80s. I mean, you have unique individuals all over with their unique life circumstances. What we are examining here is the decade as a whole. Cooper's Dissent says, I'd pick the 50s, the last civil era. One parent could work and provide everything needed. You could kind of argue that you could do that in the 60s and even the 70s. Actually, I mean, the 80s, it got maybe. I mean, you did still have that in the early 90s. I mean, I don't know. The food and medicine wasn't poison yet. Well, some of it was. The beginnings of rock and roll, too. So Cooper's Dissent would pick the 50s. I don't know. The only danger, I mean, it depends on what you want personally, but people could possibly argue the 50s was a little bit boring depending on where you lived. The 80s was kind of awesome regardless of where you lived. Cloipto says, 80s pop changed everything, but so did the rave scene in the 90s. The only little problem was the people who pushed them to change the demographic of society unfortunately succeeded. 80s were more openly, casually gay, and the 90s got a generation of people who wouldn't normally take drugs, addicted to ecstasy, MDMA. Great content. Please do a video of the Arkansas murders of Kevin Eyes and Don Henry, which I actually did since then. Okay. We have Robert Ellison saying 1950s. Ryan Galt saying, I notice a lot of similarities between the 50s and the 80s. I don't know if I see that, but I don't know. I'm not an expert in the 50s. Brent Abel says the 90s were the remedy, a giant middle finger to the 80s. Now, this is actually one of the most interesting exchanges I had regarding the 80s versus 90s. I asked for him to expand on that. Oh, wait, his reply is missing here. That's weird. I don't know if he deleted it or not. It was a really good reply. Let me see if I can find it. Or it's just YouTube being weird and not showing comments. Okay, yeah, so I did find the comment. It's so weird. It's not showing up in the community tab, but I have it in the notifications tab of a reply. Okay, Brent Abel responded, I don't know if more words will help, but I personally consider the 80s to be this cultural crescendo built from the previous decades, a time of fake causes, over-the-top glam, and general Western excess, and an all-time spiritual low for humanity, a disease of the spirit caused by physical excess, sin. Now, I'm going to finish reading the comment, but it's that's not entirely untrue. Like, for example, if you're in the club scene of Miami, but if you're in some kind of suburb having fun with your friends, those are two different scenarios there. Okay, the 90s was a sobering shift, like waking up from an 80s acid rave with a dirty what just happened, I hate myself, minimalistic, self-destructive hangover. Also, again, it depends on who and where you are, right? If you're in Seattle, if you're in the Seattle grunge scene, Portland, Seattle grunge scene, maybe. But if you're in all these other areas, I mean, some of these areas, especially outside of big cities, they carried on that 80s vibe into the mid-90s. Everything follows a cycle. The tribulation pressure of a system builds to the point where it can no longer be ignored. To those sober and with a migraine, the drunk are obvious and obnoxious. The youth of society do not express its disdain in a thesis or long-winded psychological study. But through its art, the 90s generation vomited up all that hyper-color excess. Grunge, post-metal, Fight Club, The Matrix, a few of the artistic expressions, a symbol of the middle finger to the 80s. Now, again, this is another case of many things being true at the same time. My response here, very interesting take, but obviously more than one thing can be true at once. The 80s also had a fun, hope for the future, positive vibe among the population. Early 90s did as well. Contrast that with the zombified state of apathy and despair 2000 to 2008 marinated, resulting in a current society even further zombified and docile post-social media rollout. Another interesting way of looking at it is comparing kids in poverty close to the poverty line in the 80s, not participating in any of that excess of the 80s, to kids in poverty close to poverty in early 2000s through to today. Which have more light in their eyes? Kids were free to be kids and have fun in the 80s, actually live. Today, everyone is on a screen in zombification mode. Brent Abel responded, you raise a valid point. Perspective is important. As a fairly naive and somewhat innocent child of the 80s, the actually live gem resonated with me. Then, only 20 years later, I started raising my children in the age of the prophetic 80s film They Live, so they didn't get much of a choice about wearing the glasses. It's rather sad. You know what's kind of crazy, though? Just to continue going with that positive vibe, there were plenty of serial killers and abductions in the 80s and even in the 70s, but it wasn't all over the TV 24/7. There wasn't a 24/7 news cycle, so it wasn't in the public consciousness. So that level of carefree hope and fun, it was still there, even though there was still evil in the world, obviously, at the time. Oh, wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that. Heracles in the chat saying, Bruce, you just reminded me of the show Portlandia. It was based around Portland, Oregon, trying to keep the 90s vibe going into the 2000s. It was a comedy and it was pretty funny. That sounds kind of awesome. I never heard of it. Let me look that up. I never heard of this show. That's hilarious. That is so funny. I'm going to have to check that out. Okay. So, continuing on with the comments here, Lord Zed, where is Lord Zed? Saying, the Chicago Bulls give the 90s the edge. My response, 80s Jordan was still awesome, arguably some of his best performances. And that's the other thing, too. Just the excitement in sports. Should I throw up a 1980s Jordan highlight reel? I mean, he was awesome in the 90s, too. Maximilian has a pretty cool highlight here of, it's labeled 24-year-old Michael Jordan was godlike, 1987-1988 MVP highlights. You guys want to watch this? We got to touch upon the sports here. Heracles said, play the theme of Portlandia. Hold on, let me set up the Jordan highlight, the 80s Jordan highlights. I mean, it's actually a tough call, but I think, I don't know, 80s Jordan was so awesome. I mean, I don't know if I mean, everybody wants to talk about the championships, but just the level of play in the 80s was crazy. Which theme do you want me to play, Heracles? The Portlandia theme? Let's watch 80s Jordan. Oh wow, this is actually a huge highlight. Boggin in the chat says, I was born early 70s, so 80s is near and dear to my heart. I mean, we're also trying to use objective metrics here. Wow, this is a 42... I didn't realize it was a 42-minute highlight. Okay, we're not watching that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but... Alright, here's a 3-minute 80s video. 80s highlight of Jordan. We can watch this. I mean, watching it, I mean, 80s and even 90s sports were crazy. I mean, who remembers being as excited as they were in the 80s and 90s for certain sports as post 2000? Yeah, a lot of it's being jaded. A lot of it's realizing, you know, the corruption in sports that maybe not, obviously not as many people knew about in the 80s and 90s, but call it naivete, but there was a certain pureness to sport. And even pro wrestling. I mean, pro wrestling back in the 80s, it was still kind of like, is it real? Is it not real? A lot of people thought it was real. There was a certain naivete in the 80s that was kind of awesome. There was an awesome naivete in the 80s that has to count in its favor. And I guess you'd still had it in the early 90s, but by the mid to late 90s, that naivete was wearing off. You know what else is kind of interesting to think about? Like, naivete is actually... I mean, it could be a bad thing if you're talking about dangerous situations, but in terms of just carefree, fun vibes, like, naivete is actually kind of awesome. It's definitely a plus. So here's 80s Jordan.
Rough. Yeah, jump around, grab a rebound and pump the sound. Big Ron, big man's in town.
I mean, 90s Jordan was pretty good too, but let's not sleep on 80s Jordan.
I'm taking them to the hoop until it's time for me to go. So I suggest you sit back and check my flow, yo. Give it up, pass it up. I'm about to score 3-point play. Can't you hear the crowd roar?
Heracles says it's called Dream of the 90s. Is that the Portlandia theme that you want me to play?
The Chicago Bulls picked Michael Jordan.
Boggin says, y'all remember how skateboards almost went away and then came back? I will raise you, my friend. I will raise you for skateboards.
I got my balls in my nets, my flip side sweats. Yes, the defense gets the B.I.B. Going squish up the passway, hoops and flips, money grips up the fast way. Tricky, brothers can't stick me. Defeat you on the board if you try to get with me. I tips with the C notes, the visit I got troops. And reps from the honeys after game I knock boots. So keep your eyes glued to the kid with the Spalding. Ears lace, yes, the backboard is falling. Smooth moves, you lose, so who's next? No layup, so pay up, your man lost his bets. Belleville, the vote coming strong in your project.
If I can
Straight
find
from
this
the
video that I'm
40,
looking
the
for.
Hootie, I palmed the ball like the booty. So peace and I trade to Tim Hardaway. They be blunting their cars. They be blunting their cheeks. Above the rim, above the rim. They be blunting their cars. They be blunting their cheeks. Above the rim, above the rim. They be blunting their cars. They be blunting their cheeks. Above the rim, above the rim. They be blunting their cars. They be blunting their cheeks. Above the rim, above the rim. Yeah, my big man slaps the glass. I run the point, I wax your ass. Above the rim, BBD, funky.
You can't think we're living life above the rim. You can't think we're living life above the rim. You can't think
Above the rim, above the rim.
you can't think we're living life above the rim. You can't think we're living life above the rim. You can't think living life above the rim. Yeah.
Above the rim, above the rim.
Very nervous. There was a cool documentary I watched. I guess it's early 2000s. I'm gonna skip through it, but here's a couple things so everybody can see where this is going. I'm gonna raise the skateboarding with something most people don't do anymore, but was kind of big in the 80s and even the 90s.
What's up, Vinny?
Aggressive.
18-year-old
inline
Ryan
skate.
Jacklin is also a New York legend. He brought a new style to our
Rollerblading was
sport.
everywhere.
More subtlety, finesse, and
If you go to New York City, you won't see people rollerblading like this anymore. I mean, you couldn't walk down a street in the 80s and 90s without people rollerblading in a major city. Wow, that was pretty cool. It's also kind of a weird thing how, like, video games probably removed, what, 90+% of hobbies? Like, how many legendary greats would there be if video games didn't become as popular as they were? I mean, there were always kids playing Atari, and even most kids played Atari, but just the sheer amount of games and systems available, like, it wasn't video game overload back then. Boggin said, I saw a clip last week talking about how blading went away in, like, 2007. Yeah, somewhere around there. Probably earlier. I mean, once in a blue moon, you still see... I mean, I saw somebody blading in a park one time, and they were really good. But that's like once every 2 years, 3 years, you see one guy. There was a whole documentary called Barely Dead about rollerblading. I'm going to skip through it right now. It was 2006. I remember watching it. It was so cool. I had to go rollerblading after watching it. Yeah, Bruce McGuire loves to rollerblade. Who's shocked? I really didn't think we'd be going to rollerblading. Yeah, this documentary is called Barely Dead. It kind of documents the entire history of that one. It's kind of awesome.
This time, sometime, the
skateboarding versus rollerblading rivalry in this documentary. Snazzy moves. Snazzy moves.
No. After that, it was like nothing rollerblading could do allowed it to escape the constant vigil of skateboarding's shadow.
What, 1990 to 93 maybe?
BMXers got 2 wheels. Skateboarders got 4. We've got 8 wheels. Do the math, asshole. Took the best of surfing, skateboarding, and BMX, and then we just dwarfed those bozos.
Blading the edge. Men get live.
Remembers the Corey
And the rest has been
movie,
history.
Prayer
The
of
resulting stigma
Rollerblading.
essentially erased the positive exposure rollerblading had earned itself, replacing it
That
instead
really
with the
gave a
tendency to
bump
be discredited.
to rollerblading popularity.
Now, 11 years after the first X Games, rollerblading finds itself fighting a war for survival that has inadvertently
movie.
created the very history it was
1990.
discredited for lacking.
We're in the young
Sci-fi
stage.
rollerblading.
We're getting back to the bottom because you got to
what
fix
it's
the
all about.
foundation and work
Just
with the
the
basics and make
creativity of
sure
the
that
80s and 90s.
all that is ready
There's really
and
not much
secure.
creativity anymore.
This is the story of a global community of athletes unified by a common interest.
Dope Man says, add that to the
This is what it's
Bruce
like being a
McGuire
rollerblader. Being part of a
Point out your
group
logic
that some critics
fallacies
really do wish
while
was
rollerblading.
barely dead.
The energies have shifted. Now it's gone underground, and it's gotten stronger and better.
No, that was
Form that would lead to a conscious rebellion by this minority against the image that had until then been attributed to inline skating. It was somewhere during this economic and participation boom on November 21st, 1991 to be exact, that a talented young athlete named Chris Edwards performed the first recorded frontside grind down a 3-stair handrail. Rollerblading suddenly had a new icon and was about to capture the imagination of the television viewing world.
People
By
getting married on roller skates.
No,
We
that was
don't
inline-
see that anymore. Oh, we got some stats here?
Young athlete named Chris Edwards performed the first recorded frontside grind down a 3-stair handrail. Rollerblading suddenly had a new icon and was about to capture the imagination of the television viewing world. By 1993, the global interest in freestyle rollerblading had spawned its own media source, Daily Bread magazine. Suddenly, the segment of inline skaters most misunderstood by the large corporations had a unified voice. Here, the unique culture of rollerblading was nurtured and cultivated, bringing together influential and persuasive skaters in search of artistic expression, which is exactly what they found.
There's only a
And of course, 94 is the year that everyone will hone in on. It's the year that it blew up, that people from all around the world that had been skating for 2 or 3 years by themselves met each other and realized that we were part of a global entity.
The same time as the Southern California rollerblade explosion, rollerblades started showing up in New York City,
Airborne,
specifically on MTV
Airborne.
Sports.
There's buses coming at you, you have to learn how to weave in and out of people. It's a tool, a way of getting around.
No, that was inline skating. That was too cool for me. I don't know. Are you into it? I'm into it.
Through MTV, rollerblading had an unprecedented opportunity to beam directly into millions of homes around the world, which it did. By 1997, there were over 29.1 million inline skaters worldwide, nearly a tenfold increase in just 8 short years. As the global population of rollerbladers continued to rise, the small group of participants using
No, that was inline. No, that was inline skating. That was too cool for me. I don't know. Are you into it? I'm into it.
through MTV, rollerblading had an unprecedented opportunity to beam directly into millions of homes around the world, which it did. By 1997, there were over 29.1 million inline skaters worldwide. There's two.
Or is that just general MTV stuff?
What it showed, though, were 2 things. One, that Arlo has a pretty damn good sense of humor.
Skateboarding expressed it not
So
just
the
in
whole
skateboarding,
life,
but
the
also
whole
the art. It
alternative
was this
lifestyle, the
culture.
skateboarders got triggered that the rollerbladers just kind of
It turned the
showed up with it, and they weren't around for decades and decades like the skateboarders. That was the beef.
money.
What are the beefs today? Some kind of influencers beefing? Some kind of soy boy influencers beefing? while doing kick streams, live streams on the internet. That's what the world has descended to.
And every person had a piece of mind, but we
pain settles in like the rain.
So yeah, I didn't know we'd be going this deep into rollerblading, but yeah, there you have it. I had to raise whoever brought up skateboarding. I had to raise them rollerblading. The essence of the 80s and 90s. Yeah, now they got scooters. Scooters are just so soy, in my opinion. In my humble opinion. Not so humble opinion. I don't know, there's something not masculine about scooters. Call me crazy. Alright, let me finish going over the comments here from the poll. OIC stated, or Quantum Leaper said 70s and 80s and early 90s. I could kind of agree with that. Mid to late 90s, there's definitely a shift. OIC said I'd have to be in between 85 to 95. However, it was not perfect. Politics, or I guess that's supposed to be politics, the money market, jobs, and the Falklands War, which everybody forgot about, all played significant parts throughout the 80s and 90s, creating a lot of upset for ordinary people in England. Terrorism, as in the LRA attacks, was also an active threat continuously for the general public, as the public was normally the target. Policing was an increasing method of racist cop stop and search, which included SPG special patrol groups and transit vans waiting to drag you off. A significant rise in football crowd violence that went from a punch-up to baseball bats and knifing or slashed with a Stanley blade, not a family day out. Which makes it stand out for me was the change in availability of music that was not controlled by secret societies like all popular music was, and still is. Pirate radio was the medium that played independently, produced dance, funk, rap, and house music. It was a big thing that was connected to independently owned import record shops where most of the emerging DJs worked or visited, like myself. Pirate radio made the music available to those who didn't buy in to pop, and its talentless performers played over and over all day, every day. People like Jimmy Savile, if you will, was a pop fan. You supported and financed their behavior regardless of knowing or not a suspect I wanted nothing to do with. So pirate radio from 85 and going to Ibiza in 88, 89, and 90 seal it for me. Yeah, going back to like Goa, Ibiza, all these party destinations. There were, I don't want to say they were underground because they kind of weren't, but they weren't commercialized. Now they are, so now you can't even really go there. Cute Kanji said the 90s. The 90s had everything the 80s had except improved, and had the beginning of the internet and computer era, all before the social media stuff and PC-ness, woke rubbish all became mainstream. I mean, the late 80s had internet. I mean, the early 80s had internet, but nobody really had it. But by the late 80s, there, you know, it wasn't, you know, there was a fair amount of people on the internet in the late 80s. Not a lot, but more than just one random nerd per state. All right, so that's pretty much the write-up there. So we're about done. I mean, we've been going for almost 3 hours on this question. You know, we didn't even get to, like, the action movies, but we've gone over those. The 80s and 90s had phenomenal action movies. I mean, Chuck Norris still made movies in the 90s and even the early 2000s, but not so great. Obviously, his heyday was more late 70s and early 80s. And then, of course, you had the rise of Stallone and Arnold throughout the 80s. And then Steven Seagal in the tail end of the 80s with Above the Law. And then dominating the 90s with the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme, who also kind of started in the 80s. Not so much post-2000s. I mean, there's really not too much. Because, again, just the increase in soy, the decrease in testosterone, and all these other factors that we already went over. Does anybody have any final points they want on this question? I'm going to throw up the poll now that we've gone over this. We did a poll at the beginning. So, was the 80s the greatest decade? If you answer no, that means 90s. Other means not 80s or 90s. I mean, it's after going over all of this, I mean, I don't know. I think if a single year, I might have to pick 1990. I might have to pick 1990. That might be the year for me as the greatest, as peak human civilization. But again, it kind of depends on what you want. If you want more on the freedom side, 1980, 81, 82. If you want more of the technology, then you're going 88, 89, 90, 91. But it does seem things really start to go downhill 93, 94, 95, 96. I mean, not that quickly. I would argue not that quickly. Like, those are great years. J.O. says it's a tie. we got 57% going for 80s. Because if we... Okay, it might have to be 80s, because even if we say... Okay, because, yeah, even if we say 1990 or 91 was peak human civilization, 99, 98, 97 drag it down a little bit, whereas 88, 89, 88, 87, 81, 82 don't really drag down the 80s. So we can say the 80s might have had more great years than the 90s across the board, across all metrics. Even if 1990 or even 91 is the greatest year for peak civilization. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm ending it, unless somebody has a problem with that. What does everybody think? Is that where we're at? If I had to give a single year, I would probably say 1990 is peak human civilization. But the 80s as a whole decade is better than the 90s. Just each year averaged. We have some people in agreement here. I mean, we could definitely get more into the 80s and 90s action stars. We already did a whole podcast on 80s and 90s action stars where we went over Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal, Stallone, Arnold, a couple of these other guys, The Hoff, of course. Radar says, depends what age you were. Small kid in the start of the 80s, university late 90s was 2000 when it started being expletive for me. Well, see, for a lot of people, right? Because once you get out of college, hit the real world, it's a lot less fun. But let's compare apples to apples. Who was having more fun? The high school kids of the 70s, the high school kids of the 80s, the high school kids of the 90s, the high school kids of the 2000s, or the high school kids of the 2010s. Let's keep it apples to apples. Or even the university crowd, or even those in the workforce. Were they having more fun in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or 2000s and post? So apples to apples, Heracles agrees the 90s was the best, but outweighed by the totality of the 80s. Yeah, because you could say 98, 90, 99, 98, 97, there was definitely a consciousness shift. I mean, I don't know if it was purely due to technology or other factors. But yeah, you had more cell phone radiation. Like, everything started to go downhill slowly, very slowly. So it really wasn't that noticeable. But looking back at it now, year by year, the 80s seems to be the greater decade just because, I mean, what's so bad about 80, 81, 82, 83? They had less tech, but there was still really good mental, physical health. Inflation wasn't as horrible. I mean, they really weren't that bad. If you're talking about just peak decade for fun without technology, I mean, yeah, maybe you'll go 86, 87, 88, maybe. But 1990, I mean, that's just such a solid year because it's practically still the 80s, especially the first half of 1990. I mean, that's practically the 80s. A 91, pretty solid too. I would say 92, 93, 94, there's a tiny little snowball starts starts being formed. Barely noticeable. Slightly more noticeable, 96, 97, and then 98, 99, it becomes really noticeable. And then just a massive increase in technology and obesity. I mean, all of it, it becomes super noticeable, obviously, by 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, and then it gets rapidly, then there's this precipitous drop, and just this rapid drop in testosterone, and it seems the rest of society just went off a cliff with the testosterone. So there you have it. That's what we have. Very interesting episode as always. A lot of fun dissecting these topics and all the variables within this topic, because it's not an easy topic. We'll probably end up actually doing... This might actually end up being a series, because there's so much we didn't touch upon, even within non-Hoff related music. Obviously, the music of the 80s is pretty awesome. And the early 90s. Again, most of the negatives against music in the 90s are in the second half of the 90s, not the first half of the 90s. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.